Hello and welcome everyone to today's education session on Report Designer. I am Denise Simmons with the HCI Solution. And before we get started, just make sure that you are able to see the screen and that you can hear me. If you have any trouble seeing the screen or hearing the presenter during the presentation, please just let us know. You can use the chat box at any time. Our presenter today is Dan Collins. He's been at the forefront of EHR development and customer care for over 21 years while working at Meditech in various roles. He has led data service teams that supported all of Meditech's platforms. He is a skilled leader and software developer with a career dedicated to best practices, customer care, and maintaining positive long-term customer and vendor relationships. And with that, I will turn the education session over to Dan to continue.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending. I've been battling a cold the last few days, so bear with me if I start to lose my voice. But today's session, we're going to talk about, it's an advanced report designer topic, and we're going to talk about MAT and FS data structures. And anytime, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me and ask your question. And what we're going to cover today are how the Meditech data is organized, and what are some of the different, what does some of the different Meditech terminology mean, and what's a universe and what's an HCIS, and how are records and objects different from segments and DPMs and NPR. And we're going to talk about list structures, internal versus external representations, and we're going to demonstrate some actual coding examples in Meditech's Magic Kingdom, and we're going to view some MAT data with the Object Explorer tool, and we're going to talk about the concept of sorting and preserve order records in MAT. All right. So the Meditech universe is basically a group of HCISs and rings. And a ring is a set of code, and an HCIS is a group of databases. And that's basically all it is. And an HCIS can only be associated to one ring of code. And a ring, though, can be associated to multiple HCISs. So a lot of Meditech systems are set up with a test ring of code, and then there might be a test HCIS. If you're going through a major release update, you might have like a 615 ring, and then you'll have maybe a separate 616 test ring of code, each with their own test HCISs.
This meeting?
I'm sorry, did someone have a question? Okay. Database is basically just a group of objects. And when I say objects, I mean like the Meditech term for what an object is. And an object is basically a group of records, and an object can be made up of several physical files. And a record is a group of fields in that object. So this is a little diagram that just gives you a visual representation of, what this configuration would look like. Typically in a Meditech system, there'll be a live ring with a live HCIS with a group of databases associated to that HCIS, and there'd be a test ring of code, and with the test HCIS and maybe also Zcon HCIS where conversions are tested before go live. These are arrows here because an HCIS can be repointed to a different ring of code, and that's basically what happens when your Meditech system goes through an update. And when you go through an update, a new live ring of code will be created with the latest and greatest software. And then the night of go live, it's just your live HCIS is repointed to that new ring of code, and then all the HCISs and the databases, they start running off that new ring of code once you go live with the update. And we're talking about all of this just so in relation to Report Designer and writing reports in MAT, so that this will help you better understand how all the data in Meditech is organized to help you with your Report Designer report writing. This diagram shows that the MAT and client-server NPR systems are separate in Meditech 6.0 and 6.1 versions of the software. To the end user, they appear to be just one system. Everything kind of has the same look and feel, but behind the scenes, there's a separate MAT ring and a separate MAT HCIS and a separate NPR HCIS and NPR ring. And all the data, there's a bunch of connections and interfaces that allow data to flow between two platforms, but they really are separate rings of code and separate HCISs. Now, this diagram kind of demonstrates how the data is laid out in a more granular fashion. In the Meditech system, you'll have a database, and each database will contain a bunch of different objects. Like one object might be MIS person for the MIS person dictionary. You might have another object for patient accounts in registration. So the other object name would be reg account, REGACCT. Within each of those objects, and I should say that the object is the same, has the same concept as what the DPM was in Meditech's NPR programming language and platform. So if you're familiar with what a DPM is, a data procedure module, then an object is the same idea. An object is a group of files, records, and fields that house the data. So within each object, there can be multiple files. They're like different physical files on disk, and each of those files can contain many records, and each record can contain many fields in the record. And also in client server and Magic NPR, the term segment was used to refer to a record, but in MAT, Meditech's gone to more industry standard terms and used the term record instead of segment, and they use keys to indicate, key values in a record versus subscripts. Okay, moving forward. I'll talk a little bit about list structures on the MAT platform. And list structures are the basis of how data is stored and represented in Meditech's Magic FS. The MAT platform and programming language are based on Magic FS. And the MAT translator generates FS code. So those of you that came from the 5XCS world, your EMR, your clinical applications in EMR and PCS were all written in the earlier versions of the Meditech FS platform. And Meditech took the base of that FS platform and programming language and used that for the basis of its MAT platform and programming language. So a lot of the same constructs that were around in MagicFS still exist in MAT. So what is a list in Meditech? And it's basically just a group of data items, and each item in the list is referred to as a member. And here's an example here of how a list is visually represented in MagicFS. And there can be lists within lists, as you see here. The first member of this list is actually another list of the words 1, 2, 3, and then the second item in the list is another list of these numbers, and 7 and 8 are its own list, and then you continue on, and the number digit 9 is its own member in the list, and then you have the word 10 in the last position of the list. And it's interesting how well this fits into storing and manipulating data, and these lists can be sorted and traversed and added to, and it's a pretty compact way of storing and organizing data. And it's a lot different than the B tree structure that a lot of you might be used to in Meditech's and NPR client server and Magic platforms. And this table describes the structure of the list and how the beginning of the list is represented, how list members are separated, and how the list is terminated. So basically, what I had shown up until this point is basically this code member form, where the left curly brace represents the start of the list. The comma is a separator between list elements, and the end of the list is a right curly brace. These actually, though, in reality, if you were to look at the data and how it's stored on disk, these values here, the start of a list, would be represented by an Ascii code of 1, and the separator would be an Ascii code of 3, and the close of the list would be an Ascii code of 2, and then a null list is an Ascii code of 0. You guys have any questions on what I mean by Ascii codes? That's just basically all the characters that we use in computing, like different letters and things are all associated to a certain code. And you can look up what an Ascii table is on Google, and you'll see lots of tables and things that tell you, a comma or a quote is an Ascii code of 32, and the letter Z, I believe, is 64. And there's also a few different forms of lists. Sometimes you see lists represented with the pike symbol or the bars, the separator, and there's also a literal form using a single quote and a comma. A null list is actually interesting. It's a MagicFS list that has exactly 0 items in it. So it's basically it's still a list structure, so you can join things, you can perform some functions on that list, like join things to it and insert items in the list. But like a nil value is not a list, but a null list is still a list, if that makes sense. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Okay, moving on. And here's some other examples of lists, and there are different forms, and like this. These are just different ways that lists are represented in Meditech code. And so if you see lists, and when you're using the debugger and report designer, you're going to see lists displayed in different ways, and this just kind of describes, the different and highlights the different forms where lists can be displayed and written. So retrieving data from a list. So let's say you have this list here that we mentioned earlier. The way you'd retrieve different list members from this list is you would use this code, the pike, and then a number value to indicate, okay, which list member do I want to retrieve? So piece, and we call this, often referred to the pike symbol as, in this notation, we refer to it as a piece. So we'll say that if I took piece 0 of this whole list, the result would be this other list, 1, 2, 3, because it's in the 0th position of the greater list. And then if I said, give me piece 0 and then piece 1 of this list, this smaller list would first be returned. And then if I said, give me piece 1 of this smaller list, the word 2 would be the result. And if I said, give me piece 1 of the larger list, this list set would be returned. So you see that would be piece 0, and piece 1 would be the 4 through 8. And then if I said, if I wrote some code to evaluate this list and I said, piece 1, give me piece 1, piece 3, piece 0, that would return 7. If I said, give me piece 4, the nil value would be returned. No value would be returned because there is no piece 4 in this list. Similarly, if I said, give me piece 0 and piece 3, nil would be returned because there is no piece 3 in this list here. Anyone have any questions about that? When you're working with lists in Report Designer, and some of the advanced aspects of Report Designer, you can build and manipulate your own lists, and this is it's important to understand this. So we can use Meditech's Magic Kingdom tool to actually execute some code, so that we can see how this works in the real system. So let me see. I'm going to do that now. I'm in one of HCI's customer systems now, and their test system at Halifax. This is a Meditech tool called the Magic Kingdom that allows you to actually execute some code. What I'm going to do is see if I can cut and paste my list here. Oh, hang on 1 second. I lost my window. There it is. Oh, the presentation keeps wanting to come up on top. Hang on 1 second. Okay. It looks like I can't cut and paste what I have, so I'm just going to type in the list that we were using in the example. I have to surround strings and quotes. And this is a list within a list within a list. All right, let's save that. So this is a list. If this tool here allows you to execute some code. So if I click on evaluate right now, it's going to run the code. And then this little, it's kind of like a little debugger window here that tells me knows that this is an actual list, and it displays the output of the whole list here. If I clicked on result decimal here, this just tells me the internal representation of the list, and these are all the Ascii codes of the list. So if you remember, I said that an Ascii code of 1 is the start of a list. So you can see 1 1 here, which corresponds to the left brace here twice, and then an Ascii code of I think it ignores the quotes, it seems like, and then an Ascii code of 79 is capital O, 1110 I think is a lowercase n, then a 101 lowercase e, and then 3 is the separator between the list items. And then if we scroll down here, you could see at the end, we'll see a right brace, a right curly brace terminates with the number 2. So I'm going to cancel that, but we can actually try some of the different functions here. Like if I type in piece 0 here, I want to see what happens. Evaluate, and it returns what's in piece 0, another list, that 1, 2, 3. So if I did piece 0 and piece 1, I should get not the 0th item, but the second item of that list, which should be 2. Let's see if we get that. Evaluate, and I do, and then what's returned is 2, the word 2. But this is a pretty powerful tool, this Magic Kingdom, where you could actually write whatever code you wanted to and evaluate it. So like if I did 5 plus 25 and clicked on evaluate, it'll give me the result of that. All right, let's move on. Let's get back to the presentation. All right, so using different tools in Meditech to view the patient data that's in the system or other data. One of the tools that's available to you when using Report Designer is Meditech's Object Explorer, where you can use this tool to basically look at the Meditech data definitions, and you can select an application on the left-hand column, and then you can select one of the application's objects in the middle column. So right here we have registration selected as the application, reg account as the object. And then on the right-hand column, you have both records and indexes. So we have the main record selected here, and this is telling me that reg account main has one key, and that is the OID, which stands for the object identifier. And the OID is unique for each different visit in the Meditech system. It's akin to the little AA in NPR, if any of you know that from NPR report writing. And then all the fields in that main record are listed here. Anytime there's an arrow here, that means it's this field points to another object, like accommodation points to the MIS accommodation dictionary, and active category by user points to the MIS person dictionary. And down here, we just had highlighted an index that's used by the reg account object, and this has the facility key, registration date, and active category as keys to this index. And in writing report designer reports, one of the most important things to do is to be able to select the right index for the report and the data you're trying to output on the report. So choosing the wrong index could really negatively affect the performance of your report. All right, moving on. Here's an example of using Meditech's object viewer tool to look at different patient records using this reg date select index that we just looked at on the previous screen. And remember I said that that index has 3 keys. It has the facility, the registration date, and then it has an active category. So if I want to write a report that's based on registration date, this might be a good index to use. And this is just an example from a test system here. And these are all of the objects, registration account objects. So these are all different patients that were registered on this day of October 12th, 2017, that have this active category. And we'll use this index to select the object. And once in this screen, we're looking at just this one patient, this one registration object. And this is what the OID looks like. V1 dash, and then there's a B, and then there's an actual date here. And that date, 2017, October 12th, is the date that this object was created. The rest of it, I think, is just a random unique number. So and this OID is used in a lot of the different applications in MAT, like the billing in 6.1 and abstracting will all use this same OID number to store data for this particular patient, this particular account in their databases. This screen tells me a lot. It tells me that there's a couple different files associated to the reg account object, and one of the files, and this is actually a physical file on disk, is called the master file. And these are all the records associated to that master file. And whenever you see an indent here, that means that these records are child records of a parent record. So other providers and providers are child records of provider data. The main record is really, on top. And then the count tells you how many records are there, how many records of data are there. So here, this will tell me that there's 2 provider records associated to this patient. So, maybe one of them's the attending provider for this patient. Maybe one of them is the patient's primary care doctor. Oh, let me go back. Then in this tool, you can drill down, and what we're going to do is look at the main record and see what that looks like. So this is actually looking at all the fields in the main record for this account. So we have the account number, and patient is actually the OID for the medical record number. So if we went and looked at the medical record number, we would see, several different visits for this patient, all with different registration OIDs. Any of the fields in green are items that point to other objects, so room points to the room dictionary, and so on and so forth. You can see that the admit date and time is interesting. It's actually a list of data, and we'll talk a little bit about the date and time formats in MAT a little bit later, but This is basically a list that says this is a GMT time. It's the date and time on the 24-hour clock. So 14:03 would be 2:03 p.m. GMT time. And then if GMT time is different than the local time will actually be listed here. So this is actually 2:03 in the morning. So what are they for? This particular customer is 4 or 5 hours difference from GMT time. But it's the way that separate time zones are accounted for in the Meditech system. All right. This is an example of what the list data for that patient actually looks like on disk. So if I were to crack open that main file there, what do we call it? It was the master file. If we were to crack that open, that's what the data would look like inside this file. I'll show you in a minute, but each record, the start of each record has a tag associated with it, and the main record has this tag is RGACCMN. So when if I see this tag, I know that that's the main record. And there's only one of them here. There's only one main record, where other records can have more than one, like the provider record. And you know, this is, I can see P0 here is the patient account number, and then the patient number, which points to the medical record. I can see, you know, the admit date is in here, admit date and time. And on the next slide, I'll show you how you kind of make sense of this. This next slide shows you what the data definition looks like for that data. So there's the tag there, RGACCMN. So if we went back, you can see that RGACCMN there. So I know from looking at this data definition, I know that that's for the main record. And these are all the different, describe the fields in that record. So offset 0 is the account number. Piece 1 is the patient. Piece 2 is the reg status. So you can see that if we go back to that previous slide, 0 is account number. Piece 1 is the patient number. Piece 2 is the admission status, I think, and piece 2 is the registration status, and then piece 3 is the registration type. And it tells you what the data type is here. And if we look at piece 9, that's the date time data type. So if we go back and look at that, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Well, this is the 9th. There's not a reservation date time in this one, but the next one must be the admit date, and this is the date time format. Yeah, the admit date and time is in piece 10. So this data definition describes how all the data is actually stored, and this is what the object viewer uses to, an object explorer uses to be able to display that all information to you when you're, so they can be used when you're writing your reports. This is just another representation of the data in this tree view tool, where it just looks at that raw text data, but it breaks it out into, it counts all of the different elements in the list for you. Here's another view of the reg account admit date and time. And what this shows here is this is an internal hex viewer. So we're listing the hex values for everything you see here on the right. So left paren is an ASCII value of 0, 1, the start of the list. And then in pink here, you can see each of the list separators here for this list represented as 0, 3, 0, 3, and then the list terminator is 0, 2. And this just describes the date time structure where P0 here is GMT, time zone date, period, and then the GMT time. And then piece 1, it would be the local date, if the local date is different from the GMT date. And then piece 2, like I was saying earlier, is the local time, if the local time is different than GMT. And then there's a time zone ID, which is defined in a Meditech system dictionary to describe, what are all the different time zones and whether you're in daylight savings time or not. So it was kind of a neat way that they conceived keeping track of dates and times, and worrying about having a system with multiple time zones. And it's we have Meditech has different healthcare information systems that are spanned across time zones, and how do you deal with it? It's always in the Meditech MAT data. The data is always stored in GMT and then converted to the local time zone from there. It's pretty neat how they conceived of that. All right. We're getting near the end here. We're going to talk a little bit about preserve order records in the MAT. All that a preserve order record is it's a record in MAT where the record is sorted in the order that the user left the record in. So when the user's entering things in on a screen, some screens you can move rows up and down, move things around, put them in different orders. And that kind of record would typically be a preserve order record. And this concept did not exist in CS or Magic MPR. And in those platforms, records or segments were always sorted by their subscripts. So if you did ever see a screen that allowed you to order things in a Meditech screen, there would usually be like an internal URN that would say, okay, the first item on the list here is number 1, the second one is number 2, and then it's just stored by that internal number. But MAT doesn't really have that. You can have a record defined as a preserve order record in MAT, and these records are not sorted by their keys. They're sorted by just the way that the user left them in. I'll show you an example of that. This is an example using object viewer and what the MIS document section, this one MIS document section dictionary entry looks like. That's a dictionary where you can add in a bunch of different query sections and customer defined queries. And when creating these documentation sections, you want these queries to be listed in a specific order. So you'll create a new section and a new question with a query, and you can just move that query up and down on the screen until you have it in the right position. And in the Meditech system, whenever you create a new question, it's assigned a new URN, an internal number. But as you can see here, if this was Meditech client server or a Magic MPR, this 8 would be at the bottom because we would be sorting by alphanumerically here. So it's really interesting when you come across things like this in MET, where this is actually not sorted alphanumerically. It is sorted just by the way the user ordered these records. And there's a place in the system where this is defined. It's basically defined in the data definition, where the developer that's writing the application can say, hey, this record is a preserve order record. I'll show you that. This happens to be the data definition, excuse me, for the MIS documentation section dictionary. And you can see for this record, the questions record, it has a preserve order field, and that's set to yes. So that just tells the system, don't sort these records, just leave them the way that the user put them in. So interesting concept to keep in mind when writing reports, because you may write a report that loops through different records, but the records may not be in the order you think they're going to be in. All right, this is the end. Does anybody have any questions? If there's no questions, just remember to visit our website, the hcisolution.com/webinars, to sign up for any future educational sessions. And these sessions are being recorded, and they will be posted on our website. So if you want to go back and review any of this material, you'll be able to once we get these recordings posted. But thank you for your time. Danae, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else.
Yeah, if you have any questions after this, just feel free to give us an email, and we'll answer any of your questions or set up any product demonstrations or give you any more information that you need. Have a wonderful day. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Dan, for being our presenter today.
You're welcome.
All right, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.